Since 1981, producer and writer Michael Wilson has charted a course for the most popular fictional character in the world, Secret Agent 007. For 4 films, Wilson, co-writer Richard Maibaum, director John Glen, and producer Cubby Broccoli worked to redefine James Bond. In each successive adventure, Bond survives off his wits and physical prowess rather than gadgets. At the end of the 80s, the filmmakers decide to take the character of James Bond one step further.
Your license to kill is revoked.
It proves to be the most daring move for Bond since the release of Dr. No in 1962.
Time to leave.
After the release of The Living Daylights, filmmakers discuss ideas for the next Bond adventure.
Timothy and I talked at great length about, how we were going to try and go back more to a sort of a harder age Bond.
He was always looking for something meatier to do with more passion in it.
Also, we felt, more importantly, that this type of character suited Timothy Dalton.
To find Bond's harder edge, filmmakers return to Ian Fleming. A key sequence from the novel Live and Let Die provides Bond's motivation in the film. And a character from a Fleming short story becomes one of the villain's henchmen.
What do you want?
Mr. Crest.
Bolt your door.
I think in this particular movie, I think we're truer to the Fleming characters. And that's something that Timothy Dalton felt very strongly about as well.
To keep the film current, producers create a villain ripped from the headlines.
I think that the plot on License to Kill was very up to the minute at that time. The world was being run by the drug barons.
At first, filmmakers think of setting the story behind the bamboo curtain.
We went and visited China. We were asked to visit by the government.
We were looking for an original location, somewhere the Bond people had never been before.
I suppose that the powers that be were not that enthusiastic.
And we did have a script written.
So nothing ever came of it as far as working there.
And we've still got this pressure that we're going to be shooting this film come 6 months' time.
From Moonraker, which was 79, 80, until 89, that decade, the cost of the pictures did not rise.
We were under severe pressure to keep the budget down.
I guess it's time to start cutting overhead.
The last thing we wanted to do was to leave dear, lovely Pinewood,
So we went to Mexico in order to see if we couldn't save on the budget.
We went to Cubby's office, and so he said, "So what do you think?" So I said, "Well, I think if we go to Mexico City, we're absolutely mad, And he said to me, "If we don't do it in Mexico City, we're not doing the picture." So I said, "Okay, we're going to Mexico City."
Richard Maibaum and Michael Wilson worked to redesign a story which can be shot largely on location in Mexico.
It's been a little bit more controversial than a lot of the others.
One of our objectives was to create this realistic style. It was a departure in some ways from what we'd done in the past.
I think the story was a good story. It was kind of along the lines of the Yojimbo films, if you remember the Kurosawa film, where the samurai goes into town and without really attacking the villain and all of his cohorts, by just sowing the seeds of distrust, he manages to have the villain bring himself down.
I got the guy who set me up.
Only one guy.
What do you mean?
Most of the people that are killed, the villain killing off his own henchmen.
You ripped me off, then used my own money to pay someone to kill me?
To allow Bond to realistically infiltrate the villain's organization, Michael Wilson turns 007 into a rogue agent.
God help you, Commander.
I think James Bond, traditionally, in a lot of the Bonds, has always been his own man.
With the story mapped out, problems with writing a script develop when the Writers Guild of America goes on strike.
The writers' strike interfered with Dick Maibaum able to continue with the project. So Michael more or less had to soldier on
While Michael Wilson completes the script, the casting process begins.
Casting License to Kill was interesting. It was done basically out of Los Angeles.
The first major part cast is that of drug lord Franz Sanchez.
Well, it was way before Noriega, but we were trying to create a Noriega situation there, where top people in the government were under the control of a drug lord.
Remember, you're only president for life.
It was, in fact, Cubby's daughter Tina who first suggested Robert Davi to me.
I used to go to this restaurant where Mickey Rourke and Arnold Schwarzenegger, all of us used to hang out. And Tina used to go there.
He came in the office, and he was such a wonderful extrovert.
Casting the part of CIA agent Pam Bouvier proves more challenging.
I was told that she was a tough CIA agent who hangs out in a bar. So I showed up in jeans and a leather jacket, and I thought, this is my idea of tough. And Jane took one look at me and said,
Buy yourself some decent clothes.
so that weekend I searched for basically the cheesiest, tackiest dress that I could find, and I wore that back the next day looking very va-va-voom. And they didn't have anything from the current script. They only had something from I guess it was I want to say A View to a Kill.
Except right beneath us is the key geological lock.
Fortunately, my father is a geologist, and so it didn't seem like, you know, a foreign language to me. I was able to pull it off with a little bit of, without embarrassing myself.
I remember when we were casting for Lupe, who's Sanchez's girlfriend, Cubby said to me, do you want to, she says, you've got to be in love with her. Do you want to help us cast her? And I said, I'd love to.
Robert came in and dressed up as James Bond and played Bond for me to test her.
And there were about 12 women that were testing from all over the world.
And I tell you, he wasn't bad. Robert was quite good as James Bond. He really was.
I said to Cubby I would kill over her, which is what Sanchez had to do. And I said, and I think the audience would believe that. He says, I think she's a winner, too.
Hello, Felix.
For the role of Felix Leiter, Cubby Broccoli looks back to an actor who played the part 16 years earlier.
You what? I had seen Cubby and Dana at the bistro, in the restaurant. And it was all very lovely. Hello, how are you? Nice to see you, looking great.
Cubby said to David was in the other day, he said, he looks pretty good, you know. I said, well, this guy's got a parachute, you know. I said, I think he might be a bit old for the part, you know.
And I think he was a little nervous. Probably thought by now I was on crutches or whatever.
David, he's a great, likeable man, and I found myself being swayed.
The last key role to fill is Dario, the cruelest and youngest of Sanchez's henchmen.
I went in and I did the audition, and I didn't think it was that good.
Benicio was a very new face as far as any of us were concerned.
And I just felt it wasn't that good, so I walked back in there and said, let me do it again.
There was something about him which was very up to the minute. You know, he's a very laid-back character, underplays to the extreme sometimes, but has real menace in a quirky sort of way.
Where's my wife?
Don't worry. We gave her a nice honeymoon.
For comic relief, filmmakers create the character of corrupt televangelist Professor Joe Butcher.
Bless your heart!
Yes, Wayne Newton was always wanted to be in a Bond film and had been talking to Cubby over the years about being in there.
With the cast in place, the production crew migrates from England to Mexico City.
We all flew out on a jumbo club class with special effects and the art department guys. It's a bit like an army. It's like an army getting together.
The studios was quite an amazing place, built, I believe, by Howard Hughes.
We looked at the stages, and they were pretty abysmal. I mean, they were in poor condition. Every time it rained, the water came through the roof.
It was quite an eye-opener for us.
They'd had a huge earthquake there. Mexico City, the buildings were all leaning against one another, and it was rather bizarre to look out the hotel window and to see everything at the wrong angle.
We made it work. You know, we did quite a lot of work in the studios. You know, there was no phone system. The offices were few and far between. We had to build an art department. We had to build workshops. Anyway, we did it. We set to and did it.
They have some wonderful technicians, and of course their craftsmen are so brilliant.
We built things out there quicker than we'd ever built it here.
The sets were beautifully constructed.
They were great guys and very clever technicians as well in their own right.
On July the 18th, 1988, shooting begins at Churubusco Studios on Stage 2 with a hard-edged, dramatic scene that will set the tone for the film.
What did he promise you? His heart?
It was a strong, nice, strong entrance. You know, cut out a guy's heart, you know. I think that's a romantic gesture. Right away, I'm whipping this beautiful young girl, you know, and you don't think of the kinky aspects of society, you know, and then all of a sudden the film comes out and you get all this fan mail that, you know, is enjoying this whipping sequence.
Robert Davi leaps into his role, searching for a more realistic approach to playing a Bond villain.
Timothy Dalton and myself, having been, I guess, the kind of actors that like to, you know, do as much research as possible, talked about this and went back to Casino Royale, where Ian Fleming talks about how Bond and the villain are actually mirror images of each other.
Davi brings his role off the set, much to the amusement of his fellow actors.
He would walk into the bars in Mexico City like he was Sanchez, like he was this Colombian drug lord, and that they should give me the best table in the restaurant.
Playing Sanchez, I got into that kind of character, that expansive character.
We all thought it was hilarious because we knew where it was coming from, but the people that were not in touch with that he was playing this character were sort of like, okay, we'll get you the thing.
I was most of the time hanging out with Robert Davi, you know. You know, we were the bad guys, so we're kind of like, you know, doing that thing. The bad guys hang out with the bad guys.
And I wanted Benicio's character and Lupe's character to get a sense in reality of what the Sanchez character would be. So I was a bit effusive.
It was like being in some kind of fraternity.
He definitely milked that part in a good way.
On August the 1st, the crew moves to Key West, Florida.
I thought Key West was a fantastic location.
We're shooting in Key West in August. I don't think there's probably a worse time to be in Key West or anywhere else on the East Coast.
And like 4 o'clock every day, you could be sure that the rains were going to fall down, and we could set our clocks to it. Unbelievable.
The location proves the perfect place for Robert Davi to take the title of court jester of the film's cast and crew.
And we're about to begin filming. And wardrobe fittings and the ADs, and everyone's real new to everything.
I check into the hotel room. I'm going to sleep.
You don't really know who's who yet.
But around 3 o'clock, someone calls me up with an English accent.
We'd like you to come down for wardrobe. Jean-Glen would like to see you in the wardrobe.
And I'm panicking. I'm like really like looking at myself in the mirror going like, how do I look? How do I look?
He came down. His hair was discombobulated.
And I walk into the room. There's, you know, Robert Davi and Don Strout was the other actor that was in that film. They were both sitting there laughing.
Who would do such a thing?
The filmmakers also have real work for the actors, and much of it deadly serious.
My job in that movie was doubling Timothy Dalton in a transfer where I went down a line under a helicopter onto the tail of an airplane.
And we had a plane on a rig. We built a sort of gimbal rig.
So what I was doing under the helicopter was pretty simple. You're just basically a passenger until you have to grab a hold of the thing. So Timothy Dalton says, oh, I'd really like to do that myself. Well, you know, you're the star. So I put him in the harness and hooked him up under the helicopter.
And Tim was great. I mean, he was game for it and did it really well.
There's a big difference between doing action and doing stunts. A stunt, by definition, you don't really see who it is. You just get a glimpse of what's happening, and it's normally the guy flying through the air. There's no point having an actor do it. You never see him.
If you believe it's me, it's me. If you can see it's me, it's me. The audience should just quite simply believe that the man, the character that they're watching, James Bond, does them.
He's flying into the tail of the plane. He's not far off the ground. And Cubby drove up in his limousine and got out with a big cigar and looks over and looked at me and looked at Timothy flying in and realized that Timothy was flying into this helicopter and goes, what the hell are you doing? I'm paying you to be up there. Get him down here. He can't get hurt, you know. I mean, it was good-natured, but that's my favorite Cubby story. He didn't want his actor up there doing that kind of stuff.
To create the entire effect, parachutist Jake Lombard has to work thousands of feet above the ground.
And that was for real. We were shooting it from another chopper. And, I mean, dear old Jake, he actually came down and he actually got on that tail of that aircraft, which is You know, that was good stuff.
It's like I said, horizontal free fall, and then they put this airplane in front of you, and you got to wind up getting in on the tail, and then you got to get right off because the person's weight on the tail, it's way behind the center of gravity, so it'll stall the plane out almost immediately. So you've got to just like get on and get off.
The end of the sequence looks simple, but requires elaborate preparation. A fake plane is built by John Richardson's effects crew and towed beneath the helicopter. A cable releases the nose of the plane to create the illusion. As usual in a Bond film, nothing is as easy as it seems.
The boys had previously parachuted in on the wide shots. And now we were doing the close shot of David Hedison landing on his parachute.
There was one scene where it went beautifully, where we landed right in front of the church, I first and then Timothy. And they thought they could get it better.
I asked the crane driver, you know, he was being very, very slow, the crane driver, extremely cautious. And I said, well, there's a happy medium. Can you just do something in between, a little bit faster?
And I went, and I splat right down on the cement. And I thought, it really hurt like hell.
And immediately David went down as though he'd been poleaxed.
And it was a long time, and I could hardly get up. And I finally got up, and I was hobbling around.
We got medical attention, and nothing was broken, fortunately.
And all through the picture, I had this limp because of that fall.
I felt very guilty because I felt I should never have said to the crane driver, go a little bit faster, you know.
Despite accidents, filmmakers continue to work in the warm waters off the Florida Keys. One sequence involves Bond's escape from beneath the waves. To put it all together, 3 separate film crews are assembled. The action unit, led by Arthur Wooster, shoots key shots with Timothy Dalton. Underwater filmmaker Raymond Bravo directs the film's complex work beneath the waves, hundreds of miles away, with submarines provided by Perry Oceanographics of Florida and a team of experienced divers. Arthur Wooster's crew returns to shoot Dalton on a specially built rig to simulate barefoot skiing. World champion skier David Reinhardt performs the actual stunt behind a real seaplane. And soon, the aerial unit takes over. With pilot Corky Fornoff supervising the flying, and Jake Lombard and B.J. Worth doing the stunt work, filmmakers shoot a few more sequences at the Key West location, both above and below water, some more difficult than others. On Thursday, August the 25th, filmmakers return to Mexico and its exotic locations.
We set off with 2 guys from the Tourist Bureau to go to a place near Toluca. 3 hours later, we're still looking for it. No one had ever heard of this Otomi.
I suppose it was a meditation centre of some such, or a community centre, really, for the local Indians. But it seemed along the way nobody had bothered to tell the Indians what it was all about.
What it turned out to be was a real white elephant. You know, it was built by a past president as a departing gesture, and it was kind of a tribute to the Indians. And of course, none of them ever got to see it.
It hadn't been used for years. It was a weird place at 7,000 feet up in the air.
And they'd certainly used a lot of cement building this place, I tell you, although no one ever seemed to go there.
Back in Mexico City, the crew faces an unexpected crisis.
Cubby came down to Mexico and he got very, very ill.
The air is so thin in Mexico and so polluted that it wasn't very good for his lungs to be there breathing it.
And Barbara went back with him and his wife on the plane and got him safely back.
You know, 2 or 3 days later, he'd kind of completely recovered. But of course, unfortunately for us, he couldn't come back to Mexico City.
Because he's been so experienced in this and has done so many of these films, he really trusts the people that he has chosen to produce, to write, to direct, and therefore he has his whole team in place and can go away with a relaxed conscience that he's put it in good hands.
Despite Cubby's departure, his vision continues to shape the film.
There was a place called Arabesque in Acapulco.
When you go down the street, you can't see anything. It's this big white alabaster wall.
I walked in, and the swimming pool and the marble, you couldn't tell where the marble ended and the water began, and it overlooked Acapulco Bay, the most stunning, stunning interior.
Then you go down underneath, and I can't tell you, it's mind-boggling.
It was built like an Indian temple or an Indian palace, white marble everywhere.
It was pristine white, clear as that white piece of paper. From a cameraman's point of view, that's murder, you know.
Both Arabesque and Otomy capture the exotic essence of a Bond film while still keeping the story based in reality.
Things in real life sometimes are much more bizarre than we ever do on film.
The film crew discovers just how true Peter Lamont's words are on a remote road in northern Mexico.
We had a wonderful location on Mexicali. We shot on a section of road at a place called Rumoroso, which was a very dangerous, snake-like mountainous road. And there had been so many tragic accidents over the years there that they closed this section of road down and bypassed it. And we were able to actually use the dangerous bit.
We wanted all these big tankers, and Kenworth came to our rescue there.
We had about 16 trucks altogether, and they all did various things. We had one, for instance, that could be driven by Carey Lowell with the real driver sitting in the sleeping compartment behind the driver with a little peephole so you could see where he was driving to, and that worked very well. We also had a special prime mover, which had like 5 tons of weight over the back wheels so that they could do wheelies.
There were lots of added complications. You know, we had planes flying. We had to do a transfer from a plane to the top of the tanker, which, you know, we were getting up there at 4 or 5 in the morning because that's the only time they could fly because of the thinness of the air up there. All sorts of complications.
Oh, no! All kinds of things went wrong up there, and we couldn't explain a lot of them.
There were 2 tankers supposed to be crashing against each other. He just overcooked it a little bit and sent us flying up the wall, which was not planned, but it looked so spectacular that they actually wrote that part of the sequence around this crash.
I only fell off it once. There's one sequence where the truck does a very sharp turn, I think it was to the right. And I just got my hands in the wrong place just when it made this very sharp turn, so I unfortunately just rolled off the top and landed on a sand dune, luckily.
With accidents mounting, the crew becomes open to the power of suggestion, and soon every mishap is blamed on the location's mysterious past.
Several things happened up there at Rumoroso, which were unexplained.
We were terrified to shoot them.
We had an accident with a rocket, for instance, that John Richardson, our special effects designer, had made. And I'd seen it demonstrated at Pinewood Studios. There was a guy up at a pole fixing the telephone lines, and he's up there and he got hit by that rocket, and he was 2.5 miles away from where we were shooting, and this just freak accident. It severely injured his elbow. This thing hit him from that distance.
Quickly, the stories from the location become more difficult to explain.
Guards saw apparitions walking around the car park where we kept all our trucks. And when challenged, they disappeared.
There were trucks mysteriously burst into flames in the middle of the night.
One night, there was one truck actually started moving and sort of went off and sort of stopped itself against a wall.
With no one at the controls.
Yeah, it was weird, very weird.
It was just uncanny. But it was definitely a haunted area.
There were a number of strange tales told about the road that we were shooting on. And
we tried to investigate if there was any weird thing that had happened there.
Some people had been killed on it, and the road was supposed to be haunted.
Apparently there had been a minibus with about 5 nuns that had gone over the side in that particular area.
On the stretch that we were using, and killed everyone. It went up in flames.
Second Unit Director Arthur Wooster feels the accidents form a cluster around one small stretch of road.
Where that crash happened, right on that corner, we had about 4 or 5 more incidences right on that same spot. We had Tim, and he has to rush to a truck, jump in it, and drive off. We cleared the corner, around the corner, we cleared all the trucks, we got everything out the way, and we had it absolutely safe. And Tim rushes over, he jumped in the truck right, drove off, and somehow another trucker got in there and got in the way, and Tim really went over the side. It was frightening. It was building up and building up, you know.
Finally, the crew prepares to leave Rumarosa with a bang.
The last explosion, where the 2 tankers blow up after they've crashed, and Robert Davi is set alight and walks into the gasoline that's leaking out, and they blow up. We must have had about 200 gallons of gasoline representing each tanker.
For a crew already spooked by the location, Rumarosa has one last surprise.
We shot it with 4 cameras, and one of the special effects boys was over my shoulder on the camera that I was on, taking stills.
And when he showed the still to me, it was quite spooky.
I think it was just a sort of freak bit of wind on fire myself, but it did look like a flaming hand coming out of the explosion.
Perfect arm, perfect hand. And so I thought, well, it's got to be on the rushes, because we had 4 cameras shooting there. I went through and I couldn't see it. I went through on the Steenbeck, frame by frame, and I could not find it.
Arthur brought me a copy of it, and my wife wouldn't have it in the house.
It was definitely an area not to go back to.
It was something I will definitely remember. I don't think I'll ever go back there for a holiday.
Just a wisp of fire caught in a freak moment, like a cloud that takes the shape of an animal. But for filmmakers, it seems to be an omen. Indeed, the hand of fate does reach out and touch James Bond. Though License to Kill establishes many international box office records, in summer 1989, it fails to find a breakout American audience.
The original title of License to Kill was License Revoked. But MGM told us that no one in America would understand what revoked meant, which I find very difficult to believe.
For many, the gritty realism of License to Kill seems far removed from the James Bond they grew up watching. For others, the film marks the return of the true spirit of 007.
It's one of my best films, probably the best film I've ever done. And I'm very proud of it. I think it's become increasingly popular as time goes by.
For millions of fans, License to Kill remains the truest cinematic incarnation of Ian Fleming's incredible creation, James Bond.
Although Ian Fleming has, long been dead when we actually wrote License to Kill, his spirit lives on.